I never expected that helping my new neighbor after a small accident would change my life. But that's exactly what happened when I met Caleb. It's funny how the biggest shifts begin with the smallest things. A knock on a door, a shared hallway, the smell of garlic and olive oil drifting under the threshold. For me, it began with the sound of a knife hitting a cutting board, a rhythmic, confident sound that became the new soundtrack to my quiet life. My name is Miles, and at the time, my world was a meticulously curated space of comfortable solitude. I worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, my days governed by project deadlines and the soft glow of my computer monitor. My apartment was my sanctuary, a place where everything was exactly where I wanted it to be. It was clean, it was orderly, and it was, if I was being truly honest with myself, a little bit lonely. I had friends, of course, but my day-to-day existence was a predictable, single-track loop. Wake up, coffee, work, lunch, work, dinner, maybe a movie, sleep. Repeat. Then, apartment 4B, the unit directly across the hall from mine, which had been empty for months, suddenly wasn't. The first sign was the scrape of furniture being moved, the muffled sounds of exertion, and the occasional curse word. I peeked through my peephole, a habit I wasn't particularly proud of, and saw a whirlwind of motion. Broad shoulders, dark hair messy with sweat, arms corded with muscle as he and a friend maneuvered a heavy-looking sofa through the doorway. That was my first glimpse of Caleb. He was, in a word, striking. There was an energy about him, a kind of unself-conscious confidence that I, in my quiet and observant corner of the world, found both intimidating and deeply fascinating. He moved with a purpose that suggested he was always exactly where he meant to be. Over the next few days, the sounds from his apartment changed. The scraping and banging were replaced by the clatter of what sounded like an entire restaurant's worth of pots and pans, followed by that rhythmic, hypnotic chopping. And then came the smells. Oh, the smells. One day it would be the rich, earthy scent of roasting mushrooms and thyme. The next, the bright, acidic promise of a tomato sauce simmering for hours. Then came caramelizing onions, searing steak, baking bread. My simple, microwaved meals suddenly felt deeply inadequate, almost insulting in the face of the culinary symphony happening just 30 feet away. He was, as I learned from a brief, breathless introduction in the hallway while juggling my mail, a chef. Of course he was. It was the only explanation for the kind of magic he was apparently conjuring in his kitchen. Our early interactions were brief, limited to the standard neighborly pleasantries. A hello by the mailboxes, a shared, slightly awkward elevator ride. But every time, I felt this strange pull. He had a smile that was impossibly warm, crinkling the corners of his eyes that were a deep, clear brown, and seemed to see a little more than you were expecting. I found myself timing my trips to take out the trash, hoping for a chance encounter. I was developing a full-blown, high school-level crush on the man across the hall, a man who was, in all likelihood, completely oblivious and completely straight. He had the easy swagger, the traditionally masculine energy. He was friendly, but it was a generic, neighborly friendliness. I filed him away in the unattainable category of my mind and tried to focus on my work, but the scent of his cooking was a constant, delicious reminder of his presence. My routine had been stable, but it was the stability of stagnant water. Caleb's arrival was like a stone tossed into the middle of it, sending ripples of awareness and a quiet, hopeless longing through my days. I was content in my solitude, or so I had told myself. But the truth was, I was just dormant, waiting for something or someone to wake me up. I just never imagined it would start with a crash, a muffled curse, and a knock on my door that would unravel the quiet, orderly life I had built so carefully around myself. The inciting incident, the moment that shifted our relationship from two strangers living across a hall to something else entirely, happened on a Tuesday. It was late afternoon, and the sky was the color of a dull bruise, threatening rain. I was hunched over my tablet, trying to finalize a logo design, when I heard it. A sharp clatter from Caleb's apartment, followed by a loud, guttural string of curses that were much more inventive than the ones from Moving Day. I paused, my stylus hovering over the screen. It was followed by a heavy thud, then silence. My first instinct was to ignore it. It was his business, right? People drop things. People curse. But the silence that followed felt heavy, charged with something more than just frustration. My anxiety began to prickle at the base of my neck. What if he was hurt? After a minute of agonizing indecision, my better nature, or perhaps just my overwhelming curiosity about the man, won out. I saved my work, got up, and walked to my door, my heart thumping a little faster than usual. I opened it just a crack and peered out. His door was slightly ajar. I could see a sliver of his entryway. "Caleb," I called out, my voice sounding thin and uncertain in the quiet hallway. "Are you okay in there?" A moment passed, and then his voice, strained and tight, came back. "Yeah, mostly. Just had a bit of an argument with a mandolin slicer." The slicer one. My stomach dropped. I knew enough about kitchens to know that a fight with a mandolin was serious. I pushed his door open a little further. He was standing by his kitchen counter, his back to me. He was leaning heavily on the counter with one hand. The other, his left, was wrapped in a kitchen towel that was rapidly turning a grim shade of crimson. The floor was littered with beautifully thin slices of potato and one very wicked-looking piece of kitchen equipment. "That looks bad," I said, stating the obvious. He turned, and for the first time, I saw him without his usual confident armor. He looked pale, his face was slick with a sheen of sweat, and his eyes were wide with a mixture of pain and frustration. "It's not great," he admitted, his voice rough. "I think I need stitches. The problem is, I can't exactly drive myself to urgent care like this." He gestured with his uninjured hand, a gesture that encompassed his bloody hand and his general state of disarray. And just like that, the decision was made for me. "I'll take you," I said, the words leaving my mouth before I had a chance to second-guess them. "Just let me grab my keys and my wallet." He looked at me, and the relief that washed over his face was so profound it was almost tangible. "Really? Miles, right?" Wow. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done." The trip to urgent care was a blur of traffic and Caleb's pained, shallow breathing next to me. He got 7 stitches in the fleshy part of his palm and a stern lecture from the doctor about respecting sharp objects. On the way back, the relief had been replaced by a quiet, simmering frustration. He stared out the window, his injured hand, now professionally bandaged, resting awkwardly in his lap. "Well, this is going to be fun," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "A one-handed chef. It's a great concept for a terrible sitcom." When we got back to our floor, he paused outside his door. He looked exhausted. "Listen, Miles, I can't thank you enough. I owe you big time." "Don't worry about it," I said honestly. "It's what neighbors do, I guess." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah." Well, he looked down at his bandaged hand, then back at me. A deep-seated awkwardness settled over him. "Here's the thing," he began, his voice dropping. "This is going to sound ridiculous, but the doctor said I can't get this wet for a few days, and I'm supposed to keep it elevated as much as possible. I live on coffee, and I just realized I can't even operate my French press with one hand. Or open a jar. Or, well, a lot of things." He trailed off, looking deeply embarrassed. And in that moment, I understood. He was asking for more help. He, the capable, confident chef, was completely humbled by a stupid kitchen accident. The vulnerability I'd seen earlier was back, and it was disarming. "I could help," I offered, my voice softer than I intended. "I work from home, so I'm around all day. I can make you coffee in the morning. Help with, jars and stuff." He looked up, and the gratitude in his eyes was so intense it made my chest feel tight. "You would do that?" "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm offering," I said, a strange boldness taking hold of me. "Let's just get you inside. You probably need to rest." I reached past him and pushed his door open, and for the first time, I stepped out of my quiet, orderly world and into his. The next few days fell into a strange new rhythm. My life, once a predictable solo performance, suddenly became a duet. Every morning, I'd knock on Caleb's door, and he'd let me in, usually looking rumpled from sleep, his hair sticking up in a way that was surprisingly endearing. I'd go into his kitchen, a magnificent, semi-professional setup with gleaming stainless steel and a formidable rack of pots and pans, and perform the sacred ritual of making his coffee. It was in these quiet morning moments that the layers of Caleb began to peel back. The confident, almost intimidating man I'd observed from across the hall was replaced by someone softer, more contemplative. He'd sit at his small kitchen table, cradling the mug I'd prepared for him in his good hand, and he'd just watch me with those warm, brown eyes. At first, the silence felt awkward, but soon it became comfortable, filled only by the gentle sounds of the morning. "You're very precise," he commented one morning as I measured out the coffee grounds. "Everything you do is so deliberate." I felt a blush creep up my neck. "It's the graphic designer in me," I deflected. "All about alignment and measured spaces." He smiled, a genuine, slow smile that made my stomach do a little flip. "I get that. For me, it's all about instinct. Feel. Taste. My measurements are usually a little of this and a handful of that," he sighed, looking down at his bandaged hand. "I miss it. The feel of dough under my hands. The weight of my knife. It's like a part of me is missing." That was the first time he really opened up. He told me about the restaurant where he worked, the brutal hours, the high-pressure environment of a fine dining kitchen. He spoke of food not just as a job, but as his language, the way he communicated, the way he showed he cared. He talked about his dream of one day opening a small, unpretentious place of his own, a restaurant that felt like coming home. As he spoke, his passion was a palpable thing, a fire that lit him up from the inside. I found myself completely captivated, hanging on every word. My duties expanded beyond coffee. I helped him open stubborn jars of pickles, chopped vegetables for the simple, one-handed salads he could manage, and even, in one mortifyingly intimate moment, helped him button the cuffs of a dress shirt when he had to go into the restaurant for a meeting. My fingers fumbled with the small pearl button, my skin brushing against the warmth of his wrist. The air grew thick and heavy, and I was acutely aware of his proximity, the faint scent of his soap, the soft sound of his breathing. "Sorry," I mumbled, my face burning. "Don't be," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Miles." He didn't pull his arm away. For a beat, we just stood there, my fingers resting on his cuff, his wrist warm beneath my touch. It was a tiny moment, probably meaningless, but to me, it felt like a seismic event. The world tilted slightly on its axis. One afternoon, I was at my own apartment trying to work, but my mind kept drifting across the hall. I was distracted, my thoughts filled with the smell of his coffee and the memory of that brief touch. I decided to take a break and found myself walking to his door without a conscious decision to do so. I knocked lightly. He opened it, a surprised but pleased look on his face. "Hey, what's up?" "Just checking in," I said. "Need any jars opened?" "Cuffs buttoned." He laughed, a rich, genuine sound that echoed in the hallway. "No, I'm good. Actually, come in for a second." He led me into his living room. It was messier than his kitchen, with stacks of cookbooks on every surface. He walked over to a large, unassuming portfolio case leaning against the wall. He unzipped it and pulled out a large sketch pad. He opened it and turned it towards me. I was expecting recipes or menu ideas. Instead, I saw the most beautiful, intricate pencil drawings of vegetables I had ever seen. A cross-section of a beet, its rings rendered in breathtaking detail. The delicate, fractal-like pattern of a head of Romanesco broccoli. The elegant curl of a fiddlehead fern. They weren't just technical drawings, they were portraits. He had captured the unique personality of each one. "Wow, Caleb," I breathed, genuinely stunned. "These are incredible. I had no idea." He looked down at the pad, a faint blush on his cheeks. This was a new side of him, the vulnerable artist. "It's just something I do. To relax. To really see the ingredients before I cook them. It helps me understand them." He looked up at me, his gaze direct and a little shy. "I figured you, being an artist yourself, might appreciate them." He had remembered. He had listened to what I'd said about my work and made a connection. He was sharing this secret, hidden part of himself with me. It felt like a gift. A small, significant moment that was about so much more than just a drawing of a beet. It was about him seeing me, truly seeing me. And in that moment, sitting in his cluttered living room, the quiet hope I'd been trying to suppress began to bloom, wild and insistent, in the center of my chest. My carefully constructed world wasn't just rippling anymore. It was beginning to flood. A week after the accident, the stitches came out. Caleb's hand was still tender, cross-hatched with a thin, pink scar, but he had most of his mobility back. My official duties as his helper were over. The mornings fell silent again. I no longer had a reason to knock on his door, to stand in his warm, fragrant kitchen. The hallway between our apartments felt wider than it ever had before. A part of me was relieved to be back in my own space, my own routine, but a much larger part of me felt a profound sense of loss. I tried to tell myself it was for the best. The forced intimacy had been an illusion, a product of circumstance. Now things could go back to normal. We could return to being just neighbors. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that something had fundamentally shifted. I couldn't unknow the things I now knew about him. The way his hair curled behind his ears, the quiet intensity in his eyes when he talked about his dreams, the hidden talent he held in his hands. Then, on Friday night, my doorbell rang. My heart gave a painful lurch. I looked through the peephole and saw him standing there, looking nervous. It was an expression so foreign on his usually confident face that it took me a moment to process. I opened the door. "Hey," he said, his voice a little lower than usual. He was holding a small plate, covered with a napkin. I was celebrating my hand being mostly functional again. I was cooking, and I made extra. The words hung in the air between us. "You made extra," I repeated softly, a strange feeling fluttering in my stomach. "Yeah, it's nothing fancy. Just a little seared scallop with a brown butter vinaigrette." He looked down at the plate, then back up at me, his gaze searching. "I wanted you to be the first to taste it. As a thank you. For everything." "You don't have to thank me, Caleb," I started to say, but he shook his head. "Just come in. To my place. It's better warm." I followed him across the hall, my mind racing. His kitchen was spotless, and the air was filled with the most incredible nutty, savory aroma. He had set 2 plates on the counter, not one. My heart started beating a frantic, hopeful rhythm. He hadn't just made extra, he had made a portion for me. He turned to face me, his back to the counter. He was standing closer than he needed to be. "Okay," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. He picked up one of the scallops from the plate, not with a fork, but with his fingers, the fingers of his good hand. It was glistening with butter, a perfect, golden brown disc. My breath hitched. The world seemed to slow down, the ambient sounds of the building fading into a low hum. There was only the space between us, charged with a tension so thick I could taste it. He held it out towards me. I instinctively moved to take it from him, but he shook his head slightly, a barely perceptible motion. He took a small step forward, closing the remaining distance between us. He lifted his hand to my mouth. My mind went blank. All my carefully constructed defenses, all my rational thoughts about him being unattainable, they all just evaporated. There was only him, his intense gaze locked on mine, and the offering he held. His fingers were warm as they brushed against my lips. It was the slightest, most fleeting of touches, but it sent a jolt of pure electricity through my entire body. I parted my lips, and he gently placed the scallop on my tongue. The taste was exquisite, sweet, savory, nutty, a perfect explosion of flavor. But it was secondary, a background noise. The main event was the act itself, the profound, shocking intimacy of being fed by him, of him trusting me, of me trusting him. He didn't pull his hand away immediately. His thumb rested for a fraction of a second at the corner of my mouth, his skin warm and slightly rough. His eyes searched mine, and I saw a universe of questions in their depths. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was stand there, transfixed, the taste of scallop and brown butter mingling with the dizzying, terrifying taste of hope. He finally lowered his hand, and the spell was broken. The silence that rushed in to fill the space was deafening. He cleared his throat, a muscle in his jaw twitching. "So, is it okay?" he asked, but his voice was strained, and I knew he wasn't just asking about the food. "It's perfect," I managed to choke out, my own voice a foreign sound. And in that single, charged moment, the line between neighbor and friend, between gratitude and something much, much deeper, was irrevocably crossed. I had no idea where we were going, but I knew, with absolute certainty, that we could never go back. The aftermath of that moment was as excruciating as the moment itself had been electrifying. As soon as the words "it's perfect" left my mouth, a thick, unbreathable awkwardness descended upon us. Caleb's confident facade, which had already been cracking, shattered completely. He took a hasty step back, putting the physical distance between us that the gesture had so thoroughly erased. He ran his good hand through his hair, avoiding my eyes. "Good," he said, his voice tight. "That's good. I should let you get back to your night." It was a dismissal, a clear, panicked retreat. I felt a cold dread wash over me, extinguishing the warmth that had bloomed just moments before. Had I imagined it all? The intensity in his eyes, the lingering touch? Maybe for him, it was just an eccentric, chef-like affectation. A bit of culinary theatrics. Maybe I was the only one who had felt the ground shift beneath my feet. Yeah, okay, I said, my own voice sounding hollow. Thanks for that. I couldn't even bring myself to name it. I turned and practically fled his apartment, not daring to look back. I closed my own door behind me, the click of the latch sounding like a final, definitive slam. I leaned against it, my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. The days that followed were a special kind of hell. A quiet, neighborly torture. The easy camaraderie we had built was gone, replaced by a strained, painful politeness. We went from sharing coffee in the morning to actively avoiding each other in the hallway. If I heard his door open, I'd wait until I heard the elevator ding before leaving my own apartment. Once, we came face to face at the mailboxes, and the encounter was a masterclass in awkwardness. "Hey," he said, his eyes darting everywhere but at me. "Hey," I replied, fumbling with my keys. "How's it going?" "Good." "Busy." "You?" "Yeah, same." "Good." And that was it. We retreated to our respective apartments like soldiers pulling back from a failed truce. The hallway, once a space of possibility, now felt like a no-man's land, laden with unspoken tension. My mind became a relentless replay machine. I was trapped in a loop, analyzing every single micro-expression, every hesitation, every word from that night. I'd be in the middle of designing a logo, and suddenly the image of his warm fingers near my lips would flash in my mind, so vividly I could almost feel the touch again. I'd lie awake at night, staring at my ceiling, deconstructing the moment from every conceivable angle. Hope and fear were at war inside me. The hopeful part of my brain, the romantic, insisted that a gesture like that had to mean something. It was too personal, too intimate to be casual. No one feeds their neighbor like that just to be friendly. It was a question, an offering, a test. And I had passed the test, hadn't I? I had accepted. I had let him in. But the fear was louder, more insistent. It was the voice of years of caution and self-protection. It whispered that I was a fool. I was projecting my own feelings onto a simple, if slightly unusual, act of gratitude. I had built a fantasy around a man who was just being nice. The awkwardness now was his polite way of trying to reset boundaries I had allowed myself to believe were blurring. He was straight, and I was the lonely gay guy across the hall who had read way too much into a moment of kindness. The thought was humiliating, a cold knot in the pit of my stomach. I became obsessed with sound again, just as I had when he first moved in. But now, instead of listening for the pleasant rhythm of his cooking, I was listening for clues. Did the sound of his door opening mean he was leaving? Was the music he was playing upbeat or melancholy? It was pathetic, I knew, but I couldn't help it. I was desperate for any piece of information that might solve the agonizing puzzle of what was happening inside apartment 4B, inside his head. The silence from him was the worst part. Before, even when we weren't talking, his presence was a warm, constant thing, evidenced by the sounds and smells of his life. Now, the silence felt like a judgment, a confirmation of my worst fears. He had opened a door into his world, shown me a glimpse of something beautiful and vulnerable, and then, just as quickly, he had closed it, leaving me standing on the threshold, more alone than I had been before. My quiet, orderly world had been shattered, and I had no idea how to piece it back together. The tension stretched for nearly a week, a thin, taut wire pulled between our two apartment doors. Every time I left my apartment, I braced myself for a possible encounter, my stomach twisting into a knot of anxiety. I was beginning to think I might have to live with this unresolved, humming awkwardness forever, a ghost of a shared moment haunting our shared hallway. I was resigning myself to it, preparing to rebuild my walls and retreat back into my comfortable solitude. Then, on Thursday night, it broke. I was cleaning up after dinner when there was a knock on my door. It wasn't the tentative rap of a delivery person or the loud bang of the upstairs neighbor. It was a firm, deliberate knock. My blood ran cold. I knew, with a primal certainty, who it was. I wiped my sweaty palms on my jeans and walked to the door, my heart pounding a heavy, dread-filled rhythm. I looked through the peephole. It was Caleb. He stood there, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jeans, his shoulders tense. He looked as nervous as I felt. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I opened the door. "Hey," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Hey," he replied. He stared at the floor for a moment before forcing himself to meet my eyes. "Miles, can we talk for a minute? Please." The please did it. It was raw and vulnerable. I stepped back, holding the door open for him. "Yeah, come in." He walked into my living room, but didn't sit down. He just stood in the middle of the rug, a tense, coiled spring of energy in my quiet space. I closed the door and leaned against it, my arms crossed over my chest in a defensive posture I wasn't even aware I was taking. "I'm so sorry," he said, the words rushing out of him. "I've been such an idiot this whole week. Avoiding you, being weird. It was my fault, and I'm sorry." I just nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I didn't know what to say. He took a deep breath, like a diver preparing to plunge into cold water. "The other night," he began, his voice strained. "When I brought over the scallop, that wasn't just about thanking you." He finally looked at me, his gaze direct and unflinching. "I like you, Miles. A lot. I have since the day I moved in and you gave me that shy little wave in the hallway." The air left my lungs in a silent whoosh. I felt lightheaded, like the floor was tilting beneath me. I'm not great at this," he continued, stumbling over his words in a way I'd never heard from him before. "I see something I want, and in the kitchen, I know exactly what to do. But with you, I was terrified. You were so kind, and you were helping me when I was a mess, and I didn't want to screw it up. I didn't want you to think I was taking advantage of that." He finally paused, looking at me, waiting for a reaction. I was still reeling, processing his words. He liked me. He had liked me all along. The hope I had so brutally suppressed came roaring back to life, fierce and overwhelming. "So the cooking, the thank you," I prompted, my voice hoarse. "It was an excuse," he admitted, a self-deprecating smile touching his lips. "I mean, I was grateful, I really was. But I was also just trying to find a reason to see you, to talk to you again, outside of you having to take care of me. And then, feeding you like that was impulsive and stupid and probably way too much. But in that moment, I wanted to be close to you. And when you looked at me after, I panicked. I saw something in your eyes, and it scared me because it felt real, and I ran." Everything clicked into place. The awkwardness, the avoidance, it hadn't been rejection. It had been fear. His fear. The same fear I had been drowning in all week. I finally pushed myself off the door and took a tentative step toward him. I thought I had imagined it. I confessed, my voice shaking slightly. "I thought I'd completely misread everything and made you uncomfortable." A look of genuine pain crossed his face. "No. God, no, Miles. It was the opposite of that. It was me. All me." He took a step towards me, closing the distance until we were only a foot apart. "So I guess what I'm trying to ask, in this really clumsy way, is did I misread it? What I saw in your eyes. This was it. The precipice. The moment to leap. The caution and fear that had been my companions for so long felt distant, their voices finally drowned out by the thunderous beating of my own heart. "No," I said, and the word was full of all the hope and longing I had kept locked away. "You didn't misread it at all." The relief that flooded his face was like watching the sun break through the clouds. A slow, brilliant smile spread across his lips. And then he closed the last bit of distance between us, cupped my face in his hands, his scarred hand gentle against my cheek, and he kissed me. It wasn't like the touch of his fingers, which had been a question, tentative and charged. This was the answer. It was a kiss that was both confident and unbelievably tender, a release of all the tension and misunderstanding that had held us captive for a week. It was the taste of salt and relief and the undeniable, breathtaking promise of a new beginning. It was perfect. In the weeks and months that followed that kiss, my world bloomed into color. The quiet, gray solitude I had mistaken for contentment was replaced by the vibrant, chaotic, and utterly wonderful reality of life with Caleb. My apartment and his became two halves of a single home, our doors almost always open, a constant, easy flow between our two worlds. My predictable routine was happily shattered, replaced by spontaneity and shared moments. We learned each other's rhythms. I learned that he was grumpy before his first cup of coffee, that he hummed off-key when he was concentrating on a new recipe, and that his confident exterior hid a deep well of sensitivity. He learned that I needed quiet to work, that I had a ridiculous obsession with organizing my books by color, and that my calm demeanor often masked a current of anxiety that he, with a simple touch or a quiet word, had an uncanny ability to soothe. His kitchen, the space that had once been the stage for so much of my internal drama and longing, became my favorite room in the world. It was a place of warmth, of creation, of comfort. I'd sit at the little table, ostensibly working on my laptop, but mostly I'd just watch him cook. I loved watching his hands, now fully healed, move with such grace and certainty, transforming simple ingredients into something magical. Sometimes he'd try to teach me. He'd guide my clumsy hands as I tried to chop an onion with something resembling efficiency, his body warm against my back, his chin resting on my shoulder. "Like this," he'd murmur, his voice a low rumble in my ear. Let the knife do the work. In those moments, I was filled with a sense of peace so profound it almost hurt. Our relationship was built on a foundation of small, intimate gestures. It was him bringing me a perfectly brewed cup of tea without my having to ask. It was me untangling a knot in his shoulder after a long shift at the restaurant. It was falling asleep on the sofa together, my head on his chest, the steady beat of his heart a lullaby beneath my ear. One evening, a few months in, we were cooking dinner together. It was a comfortable, familiar dance. I was assembling a salad while he seared fish on the stove. He turned, a piece of perfectly cooked fish held between his fingers. He looked at me, a playful, questioning glint in his warm brown eyes. I smiled, my heart doing a familiar little flip. I leaned in, and without a trace of the awkwardness or tension that had once defined the act, I let him feed me. The taste was delicious, but the feeling was what mattered. It was a feeling of home, of being seen and known and loved. The gesture was no longer a question, it was a statement. This is us. This is our language. It's funny, isn't it? How you can live your life thinking you have everything you need, that your carefully constructed world is enough. You build your walls not to keep others out, but to keep yourself safe inside. You don't even realize you're lonely until someone shows up with a kindness so unexpected it cracks the foundation of everything you thought you knew. I never expected my life to change so completely, but a simple act of neighborly concern opened a door I didn't even know was closed. It turns out, sometimes the most extraordinary things begin in the most ordinary of ways, with a knock, a question, and the courage to say yes.